Welcome to our explainer on Sven Biscop's book, This is Not a New World Order. It's a real wake-up call for European strategy. Biscop's big argument is that while the world's great powers are playing this high-stakes game of global chess, Europe has just been sitting on the sidelines, watching. So today, we're going to explore his urgent call for Europe to finally get in the game. In this quote, it really gets to the absolute heart of the argument. For decades, Europe had this period of, relative calm. It was acting as if the sun was going to shine forever. But geopolitics, that raw influence of geography on power, it never actually went away. So Biscop's warning is pretty simple. If you never carry an umbrella, eventually you're going to get soaked. And when that storm hit in 2022, well, Europe was caught completely unprepared. So here's how we're going to break it all down for you. First, we'll talk about that geopolitical wake-up call that really shattered Europe's sense of security. Then we'll map out how Biscop sees the global game board. After that, we are diving deep into the core of the book, the 3 key moves he says Europe must make to survive. And finally, we'll wrap up with a scorecard, looking at both the strengths and, the limitations of his vision. All right, let's start with the event that shattered all of Europe's illusions, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. For the European Union, this wasn't just another crisis. It was a profound strategic shock that showed everyone just how unprepared it was for the harsh realities of power politics. So Biscop wrote this book to answer one single burning question. How on earth could the EU have been so surprised? I mean, the signs were all there. Russia had already invaded back in 2014. And yet the feeling in Brussels was that things were, and I'm quoting here, sufficiently stable. This book is basically a diagnosis of that strategic naivete, an attempt to force a clear-eyed look at the world as it is, not as you wish it were. And look, the guy making this diagnosis, he is perfectly positioned to do it. Sven Biscop isn't some academic locked away in an ivory tower. He's a professor of grand strategy, sure, but he also directs a major think tank in Brussels, and he lectures the very diplomats and military officials who are responsible for Europe's security. His work connects theory directly with practice, which gives his analysis this really sharp, pragmatic edge. Which brings us right back to that central question. Why did Europe get caught in the downpour? Biscop's answer is actually startlingly simple. A lot of people in Europe just forgot what geopolitics even is. They started confusing the term with vague words like strategic or important. And when they did that, they lost sight of what it really means. For Biscop, getting the definitions right is everything. It's the whole foundation. Geopolitics is simply about geography, your location, your neighbors, your resources. It answers the question, where am I? Grand strategy, on the other hand, that's about your identity. It's the choice a state makes about the role it wants to play in the world. It answers, who am I? And this brilliant distinction, it reveals his core diagnosis. Europe has been ignoring the where and has been deeply, deeply confused about the who. And here is a fantastic insight. Biscop really pushes back, and hard, against this constant crisis mode thinking, lurching from one unprecedented event to the next. He says that's not strategy, that's just improvisation. Real strategy is about having a stable, long-term view of your interests. You assess events through that lens, not by throwing your entire plan overboard every single time something new happens. Okay, so now let's map out this global game board, just like Biscop sees it. He builds his argument layer by layer, which is really smart. He starts with a single conflict and then just systematically expands the view until it covers the entire Eurasian chessboard. So the book's whole narrative unfolds in 5 stages. It kicks off in 2014 when the EU was, as he puts it, unwittingly sucked into a geopolitical zero-sum game. Then boom, in 2022, that game explodes. From there, Biscop widens the lens, showing how the conflict expands to Europe's vulnerable southern and eastern flanks. Then he zooms out even further to the great game across all of Eurasia, bringing China into the picture. And finally, he examines the very rules of the world order itself. It's just a masterful way to show how one single conflict connects to, well, everything else. So we've mapped the board. Now for the most important part. What are the actual moves? Based on Biscop's analysis, we've pulled out 3 non-negotiable strategic takeaways for Europe to finally start playing this great game effectively. The first and most critical takeaway is a fundamental reevaluation of Ukraine's place in the world. This is a big one, it's non-negotiable, and it all comes down to a crucial shift in how we define things. Before 2022, the EU pretty much treated Ukraine as a buffer state, an independent country kind of wedged between rival powers. But after the invasion, Biscop argues, that's over. Done. Ukraine is now irrevocably a border state. It has become the de facto eastern border of the West. And look, this isn't just playing with words. It's a profound geopolitical reality. It means Ukraine's survival is no longer optional for Europe. It is a core, vital interest. And that leads to this really stark, no-nonsense conclusion. If Ukraine is Europe's border, then its defense is Europe's responsibility. Biscop is blunt about this. The EU has to stop relying on the United States and take over the main military effort. That means building the industrial capacity to supply Ukraine for the long haul and, just as important, developing the political will to see it through. This is Europe's war to support, maybe even more than it is America's. All right, on to the second key takeaway. Europe has got to stop seeing this as just a conflict in Ukraine. Russia is playing on a much, much larger map, and it's forcing Europe to see the entire board at once. Biscop argues that a new iron curtain has basically descended, and there's just no room for neutral gray zones anymore. But, and this is critical, Russia isn't just pushing on Europe's eastern front. It is actively turning Europe's flank through the south. From its military presence in Syria to the influence of its mercenaries in the Sahel, Moscow treats the East and the South as one huge, interconnected theater of operations. So for Europe, this whole debate over whether to prioritize the East or the South is a total trap. It has to defend both at the same time. And that brings us to our third and final key takeaway. This one is all about navigating that great power triangle, the super complex relationship between the EU, China, and Russia. This is where you really see Biscop's strategic mind at work. He says it is a massive mistake to view the Sino-Russian unlimited partnership as some kind of monolithic bloc. It's not. It's a marriage of convenience. Russia needs China way more than China needs Russia, and their long-term interests, they diverge. The key, therefore, is for the EU to avoid pushing them closer together. Instead, it needs to use smart, creative diplomacy to exploit the fractures that already exist between them. So that's the strategy in a nutshell. But how strong is the analysis itself? In our final section, we're going to give you a balanced scorecard, looking at both the winning moves and the potential blind spots in Biscop's argument. Okay, the book has three immense strengths. First is its conceptual clarity. By defining his terms so precisely, Biscop just cuts through the fog of all the buzzwords. Second is its ruthless pragmatism. The analysis is based on cold, hard interests, not on emotions or moral outrage. He is constantly asking, what is the EU's actual interest here? And third is its historical perspective. By connecting Putin's strategy to someone like Peter the Great, for instance, he shows that we're dealing with these long-term patterns, which helps avoid panicked, short-sighted reactions. But, of course, no analysis is perfect. And there are some potential limitations here. First, EU capability. You have to ask, is the book a bit too optimistic? Biscop lays out this rational, unified strategy, but the EU is a union of 27 different members. Can it really act as one? Second, domestic politics. The book focuses on grand strategy, but as we've seen, messy internal politics can easily derail the best laid plans. And finally, hybrid threats. The analysis is brilliant on state-to-state geopolitics, but it offers a little less depth on things like disinformation and cyber attacks that really define modern conflict. And so this all leaves us with the ultimate question, right? The one that hangs over this entire analysis. Sven Biscop has laid out the game board, he's explained the rules, and he's suggested the critical moves. He has made a powerful, powerful case that Europe must finally step up and play. So the final lingering question isn't whether it should, but whether it truly can.